My father disowned me for loving her, but she was the one. Still, I chose her. Chapter 1, Eggs Going Cold. The morning my father disowned me, the eggs went cold in their pan. We stood on opposite sides of the kitchen like two incompatible truths, his in a pressed work shirt, mine in a thrifted jacket that smelled like turpentine and rain. I said, "Dad, I'm seeing someone, her name is Melanie," and the fork slipped from his fingers and made a small, polite sound on the plate before the room emptied of air. "No daughter of mine." Not shouted. Declared. A judgment written on the world in block letters. He turned off the burner, scraped the eggs into the trash, and rinsed the pan as if grease were the only stain he could control. "I'm still me," I said, hating how soft my voice came out. "I still pay my half. I still. You can stay while you decide to be reasonable." He didn't look at me. Water ran hard, a steel rope in the sink. "If not, take what you need and go before dark." I stared at the window over the sink, a rectangle of February sky the color of old pews. Something inside me tried to fold itself smaller, to fit again into the space he'd left. It couldn't. Maybe it never had. I shut the cabinet where we kept plates because the sound made me feel real. "Okay," I said. "I'll go." In my room I packed methodically, the way you do in a house that has already decided you're a ghost. Jeans, paint-splotched tees, the cheap set of brushes I'd sworn I would replace one day. My cat Ghost blinked at me from the windowsill and made a question mark with her tail. "We're upgrading," I told her, and she yawned, unconvinced. I slid my mother's letter, the one she left tucked in a cookbook the year she stopped breathing, into my backpack. "You'll always want more than this town allows. Take it." When I carried the suitcase down the hall, my father was at the kitchen table with the paper open like a shield. He didn't raise his eyes. I opened the front door. February slapped my face, honest and cold. I waited for him to call my name, to say we would figure it out, to ask what Melanie's favorite coffee was so he could pretend to try. He turned a page. That was the noise I took with me. I drove until the water tower and the church steeple stopped staring. The highway unfurled in gray ribbons, billboards promised storage units, salvation, and cheap mattresses. The city rose up finally, bricks stacked on glass, strangers moving in purposeful currents, and something in my ribs loosened. I parked outside my cousin Priya's apartment, a third-floor walk-up that smelled like old carpet and cumin. "You can have the couch," she said, hugging me so tight the bad air came out of me in a rush. "The cat too. But she has to contribute." "Emotional support," I said. "Very affordable." Night fell like a heavy coat. The radiator rattled complicated opinions. I lay awake listening to traffic until it became ocean. Sometime after midnight I texted a number I'd saved and unsaved for weeks, "Melanie. Hi. It's Junie. Big day. Are you still at the cafe tomorrow morning?" The dots appeared, vanished, returned. "Always. Sit by the window. I'll find you." I put the phone on my chest and felt my heart thud against it, two stubborn metronomes disagreeing. Ghost climbed onto my shoulder and purred as if to drown out the part of me still waiting for my father's footsteps in the hall. He meant it, I told the dark. My voice didn't break. That surprised me. Before sleep finally took me, I pictured a hand-lettered sign I'd seen on the cafe door the week before, "Take a breath, then come in." I practiced the breath. I practiced the coming in. In the morning, I would go be a person who chose herself. Even if it shook. Especially if it shook. Chapter 2, Welcome Home, Stranger. The cafe looked smaller in daylight, all brick and warmth and a chalkboard menu written by someone who enjoyed the sound of squeaking chalk. Junie's hands trembled as she ordered. Before she could pay, a familiar voice floated from the espresso machine. "You made it." Melanie turned, hair twisted into a loose bun, sleeves rolled to her elbows. She had the kind of presence that made the room recalibrate. "I said I would," Junie replied, voice steadier than she felt. Melanie smiled. Then I'll make this one on the house. Consider it a relocation grant. Junie laughed, heat spreading through her. You're very generous with corporate funds. Don't tell the boss. She's a tyrant. Melanie set a cup down, a perfect heart in the foam. Across the side, in her familiar blue scrawl, "Welcome home, stranger." Junie traced the words with a finger. That's becoming a thing with you. It's a thing with you, Melanie said. You always look like you're halfway back from somewhere. Junie took a sip, pretending not to melt. Maybe I am. The door opened, cold air and noise rushed in. Melanie returned to work, moving with practiced grace, smiling at everyone but differently at Junie. Between orders she mouthed, "Sit tight." Junie watched the light shift across the counter, listened to the hum of milk steamers and low conversation. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like running. When the rush faded, Melanie slid into the opposite chair, wiping her hands. So, did you find a place yet? Couch at my cousin's. Cat named Ghost. Smells like ambition and reheated curry. Melanie grinned. Sounds perfect. You'll fit right in. They sat there until Junie's coffee went cold again, but this time, it felt less like loss and more like arrival. Chapter 3, The Girl Who Made the City Feel Like Shelter. The next few days fell into rhythm. Junie painted at night in Priya's cramped living room, the scent of curry and acrylic paint tangling in the air. By morning, she'd wander to the cafe for caffeine and, if she was being honest, Melanie. Melanie always seemed to know when she'd walk in. You again, she'd tease, leaning over the counter. You must really like mediocre coffee. I come for the handwriting, Junie said, eyeing the messages scrawled along her cup. You're still here. You're allowed to stay. Good things take stubborn people. It became their game, tiny confessions disguised as banter. Melanie's laughter carried across the cafe, soft and contagious. She wasn't loud, but she was magnetic, even silence bent toward her. Junie found herself sketching her on napkins, just the line of her jaw, the curve of her mouth when she smiled. When Melanie caught her once, Junie tried to hide the drawing. You could have just asked for a photo, Melanie said, smirking. That'd be less embarrassing. Where's the fun in that? They started spending evenings together, sometimes closing the cafe, sometimes walking the block to the community garden. It was a patch of stubborn green squeezed between two brick walls, each plant labeled in Melanie's handwriting: hope, spite, patience. Spite? Junie asked. Melanie crouched beside a bed of tomatoes. They grow better when you talk trash to them. Try it. Junie laughed, pointing at the seedlings. You're the reason plants fear women. Good, Melanie said, grinning. They should. The garden became their quiet rebellion. They watered in silence, fingers brushing, pretending not to notice how the air between them felt charged. When Junie walked home later, she thought about her father's kitchen, about silence used as punishment. This new quiet, shared and easy, felt nothing like that. It felt like the start of something alive. She wrote the words "you're allowed to stay" on her own canvas that night, painting them over and over until the letters blurred into color. Chapter 4, Ordinary Miracles. By the time March arrived, Junie's hands smelled permanently of coffee and paint. She'd found a part-time teaching job at the community arts center Melanie volunteered with. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers, an honest trade of patience for color. The kids were loud and chaotic, dropping glitter like breadcrumbs. When one of them asked if she had a husband, Junie hesitated. No, she said finally, brushing her palms on her jeans. Just a cat with commitment issues. Melanie stopped by every Thursday, pretending to be there for inventory. She'd sit in the back, watching Junie coax shapes out of construction paper and small hands. When class ended, she'd help clean up, stealing bits of glitter to press into Junie's hair. You sparkle better this way, she said. After class, they'd walk to the river that cut through downtown, its surface dark and slow under the streetlights. Melanie always carried 2 cups, 1 coffee, 1 tea, and handed Junie the one she hadn't even asked for. "I just know," she said. They talked about little things, music, childhood, the politics of tipping. Sometimes they didn't talk at all. Junie realized that silence could be a language too, soft, fluent, forgiving. One evening, standing by the railing, Junie said, "My dad used to tell me I was too sensitive for the world." Like it was a warning. Melanie glanced at her. He was wrong. Sensitive people are the only ones who notice the cracks, and that's how the light gets in. Junie smiled. "You make everything sound like poetry." "That's because you keep living like one." The words hung between them, and Junie could feel something shift, as subtle as the river's pull. It wasn't a confession, not yet, but it was the truth, waiting patiently for courage to catch up. That night, back in Priya's apartment, Junie dreamed of water, of ink spreading across paper, of a voice saying softly, "You were never too much, you were just never enough for the wrong people." Chapter 5. Firelight Confessions. The first time Melanie kissed her, the power was out. A spring storm had rolled through the city, turning streets into shallow rivers and the cafe into a flickering cave of candlelight. They locked the doors early, sat cross-legged on the floor behind the counter, and shared the last cinnamon roll like it was survival food. Melanie tore off a piece, offered it across the space between them. "We could be anywhere right now," she said. "Somewhere wild. Or somewhere stupid, like Vegas." Junie grinned. "I think I like here. Less neon, better company." Rain hammered against the windows, thunder rolling over the skyline. The air smelled of coffee and ozone, the kind of scent that makes you feel like everything is about to happen. Melanie was watching the storm, not Junie, when she said quietly, "My mother used to tell me that love should make you braver." But all the women she loved made her hide. "I promised I'd do it differently." Junie swallowed. "And are you?" Melanie turned to her. Her eyes, caught in candlelight, were half dare, half prayer. "Trying. You make it easy." The lightning flashed, and she leaned in. The kiss was soft, a question more than an answer, tasting of sugar and heat and possibility. When they pulled apart, neither spoke. The silence was its own confession. Junie looked at her cup, at the faint swirl of melted foam. "I think I've been waiting for this for a long time." "Me too," Melanie whispered. "Maybe we just needed the lights to go out first." They stayed there until the candles burned low, until the storm outside tired itself out. When Junie finally walked home, rain in her hair and heart pounding wild, she realized the ache that used to follow her everywhere was gone. In its place was something steadier, like a small fire that didn't need tending to stay alive. Chapter 6. The Shape of Belonging. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the blinds like it had been holding its breath. Junie stood in front of the mirror brushing her hair and felt different, like someone had rearranged her bones while she slept. Not lighter, exactly. Just aligned. At the cafe, everything was normal, almost suspiciously so. Melanie was behind the counter humming something low and wordless, her hair pulled up, her hands moving automatically through the morning rush. When their eyes met, the corner of Melanie's mouth twitched upward, a secret smile they both pretended not to notice. Junie took her drink to the window, pretending to scroll her phone while watching Melanie move. It wasn't the dramatic rush of new love that caught her, it was the quietness of it. The way her chest didn't clench anymore. The way she wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. Later, after the last customer left, Melanie joined her in the back booth. "You okay?" she asked, voice gentle. "I think so." "You're doing that thing again," Melanie said, leaning in. "What thing?" "Looking like you're trying to memorize the air." Junie laughed softly. "Maybe I am." Melanie reached across the table, resting her hand over Junie's. "You don't have to. I'm not going anywhere." It was simple. No grand promises, no declarations. Just a sentence that fit right between two heartbeats and stayed there. When Junie got home that night, she set up a blank canvas. No sketches, no plan. Just color. She painted until the walls seemed to breathe with her, gold for warmth, blue for truth, green for the strange peace of being understood. When she stepped back, she realized it wasn't a portrait or a landscape. It was a feeling, soft edges, steady light. She titled it Belonging. And for the first time, the word didn't sound like a question. Chapter 7, The Cost of Silence. A few weeks later, Junie's father called. The name flashed on her phone like an echo she hadn't expected to hear again. For a long minute she just stared at it, thumb hovering, heart thudding in her throat. Ghost, the cat. Blinked from the windowsill, unimpressed with the human drama. She answered. Junie. His voice was clipped, polite. Like a voicemail meant for someone else. Dad. A pause long enough for the years to fit inside it. Your cousin sent me one of your paintings. The one with the words. You're allowed to stay. Junie pressed a hand to her chest. She wasn't supposed to. Well, she did. He cleared his throat. It's good. She waited, the air trembling with everything unsaid. Then he said, You look happy. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even acceptance. It was a sentence that tiptoed around regret, and that was somehow worse. I am, she said finally. Good, he replied, and then, quieter, I don't understand it, but I'm glad you're safe. Junie shut her eyes. She could feel her pulse in her fingertips, steady and alive. You don't have to understand it. He said her name once more, softly, then hung up. The silence after wasn't cruel this time. It just was. Melanie found her an hour later, sitting on the floor with the phone in her lap, eyes glassy but dry. You heard from him, she said, not asking. Junie nodded. He didn't apologize. Melanie crouched down, brushed her thumb over Junie's cheek. Maybe you didn't need him to. Junie let out a shaky breath. I thought I did. Maybe what you needed, Melanie said, was to hear him say your name without owning it. Junie looked up. You always know how to untangle things. That's because you paint in knots, Melanie said softly. And somehow, that made Junie laugh. A small, fragile sound, but real. Chapter 8, What Forgiveness Looks Like. That weekend, Junie drove back to her hometown. Not to see her father, at least that's what she told herself, but to drop off art supplies at the high school where her old art teacher still ran an after-school program. The highway unspooled under a sky the color of old postcards. The town hadn't changed. The same grocery store marquee still begged people to try our famous sheet cake. The same church bells rang at noon. The same faces she used to recognize now blinked past her without recognition. She parked outside her childhood house and sat there with the engine off, heart pounding like she'd trespassed on her own ghost. The curtains in the front window were different, blue instead of the faded beige her mother had loved. He was home. She could see his shadow move across the kitchen. For a second she thought about knocking. Instead, she pulled a folded envelope from her pocket. Inside was one of her smallest paintings, a sunrise done in quick strokes of yellow and pale rose. On the back she'd written I'm okay. You can be too. She slipped it into the mailbox, then backed away before she could change her mind. Driving back toward the city, the tension in her shoulders began to melt. Forgiveness, she realized, wasn't a door waiting to be opened. It was a road she'd already been walking, step by reluctant step. Melanie was waiting at her apartment, barefoot, a pot of soup on the stove. You did it, she said, without asking what. Junie dropped her keys on the counter, walked straight into her arms. I left him a painting. Melanie kissed the top of her head. Then you said everything that needed saying. They ate on the couch, soup warm between their palms, the television muttering some forgettable movie in the background. I thought forgiveness was supposed to feel like peace, Junie murmured. Melanie smiled against her shoulder. Sometimes it just feels like not flinching anymore. Junie let that settle inside her. Outside, sirens wailed, the city kept breathing, and she thought maybe she finally knew what home sounded like. Chapter 9, When the Sky Turned Gold. September arrived soft and slow, the city shedding heat like a fever. Junie's art show at the community center drew a crowd that smelled of paint, sugar, and the kind of curiosity that doesn't know what it's looking for until it finds it. The walls were lined with pieces from the last 6 months, paintings that tracked the shape of her new life. One of them, a portrait of 2 hands clasped under warm light, was titled Learning to Stay. Melanie stood by it, listening to people whisper interpretations. When Junie approached, she murmured, "They keep trying to guess whose hands they are." Junie smirked. "They're ours." Melanie's lips quirked. "Good. Let them wonder." After the reception, they walked to the rooftop above Junie's building, where the city spread beneath them like an unfinished painting, edges blurred, colors breathing. The sky was turning gold, the kind of gold that makes everything look like a memory you haven't lived yet. "You ever think about what's next?" Melanie asked, leaning against the railing. "Always," Junie said. "But I used to imagine the future like a punishment, something I had to survive. Now it feels like room." Melanie nodded. "That's what freedom sounds like when you stop running from it." They stood in silence, watching the sunset fall into the buildings. Somewhere below, a siren cried, a dog barked, and laughter echoed from a nearby balcony. Life happening all at once. "I used to think love was supposed to save me," Junie said quietly. "And now?" She turned to her, eyes catching the light. "Now I think it's supposed to see me." Melanie brushed a curl from Junie's cheek, smiling the kind of smile that doesn't ask for anything in return. "Then you're doing it right." When Junie kissed her, it wasn't a confession or a victory, it was an answer. Below them, the city lights flickered on one by one, as if the whole world had decided to stay up and watch. Chapter 10, The Life We Built. Winter found them anyway, as it always does, sneaking up between moments of contentment. The cafe's windows fogged with breath and cinnamon steam, Junie's art center filled with wool coats and the squeak of wet shoes. She and Melanie fell into the season's rhythm together, early mornings, long evenings, and an apartment that smelled of paint, soup, and lavender detergent. Sometimes, when the sky turned that strange December blue, Junie would stop mid-stroke and just look at her life. Ghost asleep in the laundry basket. Melanie humming in the kitchen, trying to flip pancakes with the concentration of a surgeon. A mug on the counter that read "Good Trouble." It wasn't the grand life she used to imagine, the one she thought she needed to justify leaving. It was quieter, richer, full of tiny, ordinary miracles. One night, wrapped in a blanket on the couch, Melanie whispered, "Do you ever miss it? The before?" Junie shook her head. "No. I miss who I was supposed to be, sometimes. But I don't miss living for someone else's permission." Melanie smiled into her shoulder. "Good answer." Junie thought about her father, about the small painting she'd left behind. She didn't know if he'd hung it, thrown it away, or burned it in his yard. It didn't matter. The act of leaving it had been enough. She kissed the top of Melanie's head and said, "I think this is it." "What?" "The life I thought I'd never deserve." Melanie tilted her face up, her eyes reflecting the TV's light. "And it's still yours, even when it's messy." Junie laughed softly. "Especially then." Outside, snow began to fall, a thin, tentative layer over the city that had saved her. And for the first time, she didn't feel like she'd escaped anything. She felt like she'd arrived. She whispered, more to herself than anyone, "Still, I chose her." And that choice kept choosing her back. Epilogue, years later. The gallery smelled like lemon oil and rain. A new show was opening, Junie Patel's Inheritance of Light. She stood near the entrance, watching visitors drift through the room, pausing at canvases that no longer hid the woman who painted them. One was titled February Morning. A kitchen table. A cooling pan of eggs. An open door with sunlight flooding in. Another was belonging, all soft blues and golds, the ghost of two figures leaning toward each other in laughter. And near the back hung still, I chose her. It was her most intimate piece, Melanie standing in profile, one hand tucked into her apron pocket, the other reaching off frame, towards something unseen. The paint caught the light so that from every angle, the gesture looked different, sometimes grasping, sometimes offering, sometimes simply being. Junie felt an arm slide around her waist. You did it again, Melanie murmured against her ear. Did what? Made people cry in public. Junie smiled. Art's cheaper than therapy. Not for us. Melanie kissed her cheek, then stepped back to look at the painting. You think your father would like it? Junie considered. He'd say it's too sentimental. But he sent me a card last month. No words, just a sketch of the sunrise I left him. Melanie's eyes softened. That's something. It's enough. They walked the gallery together, stopping every few steps so Junie could greet someone or straighten a frame. When they reached the window, the city lights shimmered against the glass, each reflection a version of the life she might have lived. Melanie squeezed her hand. Still worth choosing? Junie looked around, at the people she'd met, the art she'd made, the woman beside her who still wrote tiny notes on coffee cups even after all these years, and said, every single day. Outside, the night thickened into gold and violet. The world kept moving, and Junie kept choosing, again and again, exactly where she belonged. The end. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you love this little sapphic romance.